In a world of light and shadow where kingdoms rise and fall, one name echoes through the ages: Arthas Menethil. A prince born with honor in his heart and destiny in his blood. His story is not one of triumph, but of tragedy. Of a hero who walked too far into the darkness believing he could control it. From the shining halls of Lordaeron to the frozen wastelands of Northrend, Arthas's journey would change the face of Azeroth forever. The righteous paladin who fought to save his people would one day raise them from their graves. The son who once knelt before the light would one day bow only to the cold whisper of death. This is the tale of how hope turns to despair, how duty becomes obsession, and how a single choice can shape the destiny of an entire world. If you love deep stories, epic characters, and the legends that shaped gaming history, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and prepare yourself, because now we begin the story of Arthas. From Prince to the Lich King. Arthas Menethil was born into the golden age of Lordaeron, a kingdom of peace, prosperity, and faith. His father, King Arthas Menethil II, ruled with wisdom and patience, guiding his people with the strength of tradition and the blessing of the light. To the people of Lordaeron, the young prince was a symbol of hope, the promise that their legacy would endure through him. From the earliest days of his childhood, Arthas was surrounded by greatness. The noble paladin Uther the Lightbringer became his mentor, shaping not just his combat skills, but his sense of honor and justice. Uther saw potential in the prince, a strong heart and an unyielding will, but also a spark of impulsiveness that could one day burn out of control. Under Uther's guidance, Arthas learned the sacred ways of the light, compassion, discipline, and sacrifice. Yet even as he trained to be a protector, he longed for glory, eager to prove himself in battle. Jaina Proudmoore entered his life during these formative years, a brilliant mage from Dalaran, intelligent, curious, and kind. Their connection was immediate, a blend of friendship and affection that would grow into something deeper. They often walked through the gardens of Lordaeron Castle, discussing magic, duty, and the future they might one day share. Jaina's calm intellect balanced Arthas's fiery determination, yet even she sensed the restlessness that stirred within him. As Arthas matured, his responsibilities grew heavier. He was trained not only as a warrior but as a ruler. Tyrannus instilled in him the ideals of leadership, that a king must place his people's welfare above his own desires. Arthas listened, but deep inside he yearned to act rather than deliberate. He saw his father's diplomacy as hesitation, mistaking patience for weakness. Where Tyrannus believed in compromise, Arthas believed in decisive action. His rise through the ranks of the Silver Hand was swift. Uther proudly watched as Arthas was anointed a paladin, blessed by the light itself. The ceremony was grand. Banners fluttered, bells rang, and the people cheered for the young prince who had sworn to defend them. For Arthas, it was a moment of triumph and validation. Yet beneath the shining armor, pride began to take root. He wanted to be remembered not only as his father's son, but as a hero in his own right, someone who would be praised not for his lineage, but for his deeds. There were early tests that revealed both his valor and his temper. When the orcish remnants of the old horde raided the outskirts of Lordaeron, Arthas rode at the head of his knights, cutting down the invaders with fearless precision. His victories brought him fame and admiration, but also an intoxicating sense of righteousness. He believed the light was with him, that every choice he made was guided by justice. Yet in moments of frustration, when things didn't go as planned, he could be quick to anger, a dangerous trait for one who wielded both a crown's authority and the light's power. Jaina often tried to temper his spirit. She would remind him that true strength was not in dominance, but in understanding. Arthas would smile and nod, but deep down he felt she could not understand the burden he carried. To him, compassion was a luxury that rulers could not always afford. He wanted to protect his people, yes, but more than that, he wanted to be seen as the one who saved them, no matter the cost. In those quiet moments between duty and destiny, Arthas still seemed the shining knight of Lordaeron, brave, loyal, and pure. The people adored him. The church praised him. His father believed in him, and Jaina loved him. But in the cracks of that perfect image, shadows were already forming. A small hint of arrogance, a flicker of impatience, the belief that he alone knew what was right. These were not yet the traits of a tyrant, nor the signs of madness, merely the flaws of a man too eager to bear the world's weight on his shoulders. But in Azeroth, even the smallest spark can one day ignite a fire that consumes kingdoms. And though none could see it then, the path that would lead Arthas Menethil to damnation had already begun. The years that followed were kind to Lordaeron, but peace in Azeroth was always fragile. Beyond its shining cities and green farmlands, dark forces stirred. Whispers of a mysterious plague began to reach the royal court. Villages in the northern regions falling silent, crops withering and entire families vanishing overnight. At first, the report seemed like local superstition, but soon the evidence became impossible to ignore. Arthas, now a seasoned paladin of the Silver Hand, took it upon himself to uncover the truth. Driven by duty and a growing sense of urgency, he led his knights northward. With him rode Jaina Proudmoore, sent from Dalaran to study the nature of this strange disease. The two traveled through desolate villages, their streets littered with the signs of sudden death, rotting food, abandoned tools, doors left ajar, as if their owners had simply vanished into the night. The first infected settlement they encountered was Andorhal, a once thriving trade town now eerily quiet. As Arthas and Jaina investigated, they found that the plague was unlike any known sickness. The dead did not rest. They rose again, twisted into hideous forms, driven by a single hunger to spread death to the living. It was here that Arthas first came face to face with the undead Scourge, and for the first time in his life, he felt true fear. Yet that fear quickly turned to fury. He ordered the burning of infected grain stores, the quarantining of survivors, and the immediate execution of anyone showing symptoms. To his men, his decisiveness was inspiring, the mark of a true leader. To others, it was a sign of something darker, a prince willing to wield absolute power without hesitation. In Andorhal, Arthas also discovered the presence of a manipulator behind the plague, a dreadlord named Mal'Ganis, who claimed to serve a higher master. Mal'Ganis taunted him, whispering promises of ruin, telling him that everything Arthas loved would soon belong to the Scourge. It was the first time Arthas's battle became personal. The plague was no longer just a threat to his kingdom. It was an insult, a challenge to his pride and his strength. Jaina saw the change in him. His words grew sharper, his temper shorter. The young man who once fought with compassion was now consumed by the need to eradicate his enemy at any cost. She warned him that anger would cloud his judgment, but Arthas brushed her concerns aside. He believed that the light guided his every move, that what he did was not cruelty but justice. The deeper they went into the infected lands, the clearer the horror became. Villagers were unknowingly eating poisoned grain distributed by the Cult of the Damned, a fanatical group that worshipped the very plague that was destroying them. Arthas's heart hardened as he saw entire families turn against each other in madness and fear. The sight of a father striking down his own son to prevent him from turning into a ghoul haunted him, yet it also fed his conviction. To stop this evil, mercy could no longer be an option. Back in Capital City, King Tyrannus urged patience. He wanted to send for reinforcements to study the plague further before acting. But Arthas could not wait. Each passing day meant more deaths, more villages lost. He was certain that hesitation would doom them all. To him, delay was weakness, and weakness was betrayal. The young prince set out again, now with a grim resolve. The light still shone around him, but its warmth seemed distant. His eyes carried a new fire, not of faith but of obsession. Every report of infection, every rumor of undead activity drew him further north. The name Mal'Ganis echoed in his mind like a curse, and he swore he would find and destroy the demon responsible. In the shadows of burning villages, the once bright paladin began to change. His voice, once filled with hope, grew cold and commanding. The laughter he shared with Jaina became rare, replaced by long silences and distant stares. He had not yet crossed the line, but his steps were leading him closer to it with each decision. The people still hailed him as a savior, and his soldiers followed him without question. But deep inside, Arthas was beginning to believe that saving his kingdom meant being willing to destroy it first. The first seeds of Stratholme were planted here, in these moments of fear, fury, and desperation. The prince who had sworn to protect his people had begun to believe that he alone could decide who deserved to live. And though he could not yet see it, the road ahead would demand from him the most terrible choice imaginable. The air in Stratholme was thick with the smell of smoke and sickness. Once one of Lordaeron's proudest cities, its grand towers now loomed over silent streets, as if the very stone held its breath. Reports had reached Arthas that the plague had taken root here, not just in the grain or the wells, but in the people themselves. To the prince, this was the final stand. If he could stop the infection here, perhaps the rest of the kingdom could still be saved. Riding at his side were two people who had shaped his life more than anyone else: Uther the Lightbringer, his mentor, and Jaina Proudmoore, the woman he loved. Together they rode through the city gates, greeted by fearful citizens who begged for aid. Yet as Arthas looked into their faces, he saw not his people, but potential corpses waiting to rise as servants of the Scourge. A messenger brought the grim truth. The grain distributed to Stratholme had already been tainted. Every loaf of bread, every sack of flour carried the seeds of undeath. It was only a matter of time before the entire population would turn. Arthas's heart pounded as he realized the scale of the disaster. There was no cure, no salvation. The people of Stratholme were already dead. They just didn't know it yet. Uther urged restraint. He argued that the light would guide them to another solution, that to slaughter innocent people would be a sin that could never be undone. But Arthas saw things differently. To him, hesitation was the same as surrender. Every second wasted meant more undead rising, more innocents devoured. His mind was made up before anyone could stop him. "Purge the city," he said. The words fell heavy, final, like a death knell. Uther stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I am," Arthas replied, his voice cold and steady. "These people are infected. They will turn. I will not allow this city, my kingdom, to fall because we were too cowardly to act." The argument that followed was fierce. Uther, unwavering in his faith, refused the command. He declared that no true knight of the Silver Hand would carry out such an atrocity. Arthas, consumed by his conviction, stripped Uther of his command on the spot, an act that shattered the bond between them forever. Jaina pleaded with him, tears in her eyes. She begged him to find another way, to remember the compassion that once guided him. But Arthas's eyes were hard as steel. "I have to do this," he said. "I must save my people, no matter the cost." And so he did what no prince, no paladin, should ever have to do. The purge began at dawn. Arthas led his men through the city, their torches lighting the streets in a cruel mockery of the light he once served. House by house they entered, giving mercy through the sword. The cries of the innocent echoed through the alleyways, pleas for help, for forgiveness, for understanding. But there was none to give. Jaina could not bear to watch. She turned away, leaving the city in silence, her faith in Arthas broken. Uther, too, departed, unable to stand by the prince's side any longer. And so, surrounded by loyal soldiers and the screams of his dying people, Arthas continued his grim work alone. When at last the fires died and the streets were quiet, Stratholme was no longer a city. It was a graveyard. The scent of ash and blood hung heavy in the air, and Arthas stood amidst the ruins of his own making. His face was expressionless, his eyes hollow. He told himself it had to be done, that he had saved countless more lives by sacrificing this one city. But deep inside, something had cracked. That day, the light within him dimmed. What had begun as righteous purpose had twisted into obsession. He no longer fought for his people's survival. He fought to justify his own choices. The plague had not just taken the bodies of the living, it had begun to infect his soul. As he left the smoldering ruins of Stratholme, Arthas vowed that Mal'Ganis would pay for this. The Dreadlord had orchestrated this horror, and Arthas would hunt him to the ends of the earth if he had to. Vengeance became his new faith, and Frostmourne, the blade he had yet to find, awaited him as the proof of his devotion. The prince who had once been the shining hope of Lordaeron was now a man walking in shadow. His heart, though still beating, had already begun to freeze, and with each step away from Stratholme, he walked closer to the abyss that would claim him forever. The city of Stratholme burned behind him, but its fires continued to rage within his heart. Arthas Menethil rode north with a single purpose: to destroy Mal'Ganis, the Dreadlord who had poisoned his kingdom and twisted his people into monsters. Every mile he traveled, every corpse he left behind, fed his conviction that vengeance was justice. The light no longer comforted him. It was a memory, faint and distant, drowned beneath the weight of guilt and fury. He gathered what forces he could, knights still loyal to him, men who believed in his cause, even as whispers spread that the prince had gone mad. The crown offered no sanction for this mission, but Arthas no longer sought his father's approval. He saw himself as the only one willing to do what had to be done, the only one who truly understood the cost of inaction. Their destination was Northrend, the frozen continent at the edge of the world. Rumor held that Mal'Ganis had fled there to command the Scourge from the shadows. To Arthas, the land itself was an afterthought. It was only the stage upon which he would finally claim his revenge. When their ships set sail, the skies were grey, and the wind bit with a cruel chill, an omen of what awaited him. The journey was brutal. Icebergs tore at the hulls, storms lashed the fleet, and men froze in their armor before they even reached the shore. Yet Arthas pressed on, his resolve hardening with every life lost. When they finally landed, they were greeted not by enemies, but by a wasteland of endless snow and silence. The cold seemed alive, an invisible hand that reached into their lungs, whispering promises of despair. In that desolation, Arthas's obsession deepened. He drove his troops relentlessly across the tundra, hunting every trace of Mal'Ganis. Their rations ran low, morale began to fracture, and still he pushed forward. His commanders begged him to turn back, to regroup, but he would not listen. Every protest felt like betrayal. Every suggestion of retreat sounded like cowardice. Then came word that reinforcements from Lordaeron had arrived, led by his old friend Muradin Bronzebeard, a seasoned dwarven explorer. Muradin greeted Arthas with warmth and concern, offering aid and wisdom, but he saw the madness behind the prince's eyes. When Arthas spoke of Mal'Ganis, his voice carried not justice, but hatred. Together, they discovered the legend of an ancient weapon buried deep within the ice, a sword said to hold incredible power. Its name was Frostmourne. Muradin warned Arthas that such relics often came with a price far greater than any mortal could bear, but Arthas had already made his choice long before he even touched the hilt. The campaign grew bloodier as Mal'Ganis's undead forces harassed their camps night after night. Men vanished into the snow, only to return as ghouls the next day. Arthas's army dwindled and desperation took hold. When supplies ran out, he ordered the burning of his own ships to prevent retreat, trapping his men in Northrend. "We'll win or we'll die here," he told them. The soldiers obeyed, but in their hearts they knew their prince had crossed a line. Each day in the frozen wastes stripped away another piece of the man he once was. His armor grew heavier, his voice colder. He no longer spoke of his people or his kingdom, only of vengeance. He had convinced himself that if Mal'Ganis died, everything would be set right again. But vengeance is a hunger that cannot be satisfied. As they ventured deeper into the ice, the landscape itself seemed to mirror Arthas's decay. The wind screamed across jagged cliffs like the voices of the damned. Snow blinded the horizon, and the sun rarely broke through the clouds. At night, Arthas would stand alone, staring into the endless white, as if waiting for the world to answer his rage. Muradin's men found the entrance to a cavern, the resting place of Frostmourne. Inside, frozen statues of long-dead warriors lined the walls, each one seeming to warn the intruders to turn back. But Arthas was deaf to warnings. The promise of power, of victory, of release from his guilt drew him forward like a beacon. Outside, the winds howled, and the last light of Arthas's humanity flickered. He no longer sought to protect the living, he sought to punish the dead. In chasing Mal'Ganis across this forsaken land, he had already lost what he came to avenge. The ice around him was not just a prison of stone and frost, it was a mirror of his soul, cold, empty, and unyielding. Northrend would not just test Arthas's will, it would claim it entirely. And as he approached the sword that would define his fate, the Prince of Lordaeron was already gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. A man who believed that salvation could be found through damnation. The entrance to the cavern loomed before Arthas like the mouth of some ancient beast, exhaling a breath of deathly cold. The runes carved into the walls glowed faintly beneath layers of ice, whispering words in a language long forgotten. Every instinct in Muradin told him to turn back, to leave this place untouched, but Arthas pressed forward, eyes fixed on the promise that awaited within. He could feel it calling to him, a presence both dreadful and alluring. Frostmourne. The cursed rune blade lay suspended in a crystalline block of ice, as though the world itself had tried to imprison it. The closer Arthas came, the stronger the voice in his mind became. Soft at first, then clear as a whisper carried on the wind. It spoke of power, of salvation, of the strength to end all suffering. Muradin stepped in front of him, his axe raised not in threat but in warning. "Lad, that blade is evil, I can feel it. Whatever's trapped in that ice, it's not meant for mortal hands." But Arthas was beyond reason. His men were dead, his ships burned, and the weight of Stratholme's ashes still clung to his soul. "If this blade can help me save my people," he said, "then I will pay any price." With that he approached the frozen altar. The runes around Frostmourne flared to life, filling the cavern with blinding light. A spectral voice echoed through the chamber, cold and inhuman. "Whosoever takes up this blade shall wield power eternal, but must bear the curse of damnation." Muradin shouted for him to stop, but Arthas did not hesitate. He struck the ice with his hammer, shattering it in a thunderous explosion of shards. Frostmourne fell free, its metal gleaming like moonlight on a corpse. The voice spoke again, this time directly to Arthas's mind. "Your sacrifice is accepted." In that moment, a surge of power coursed through him. Exhilarating, intoxicating, overwhelming, he felt invincible. But as Frostmourne's hilt closed in his grip, something within him broke. His heart went silent, and a piece of his soul was torn away, devoured by the sword. Muradin was thrown back by the blast, his body striking the stone floor. When the echoes faded, the cavern was still. Arthas turned to his fallen friend, his face expressionless. "I'm sorry," he murmured, though there was no emotion in his voice. "I had to do it." When he emerged from that cave, the wind no longer felt cold. Frostmourne hung at his side, its edge faintly humming with hunger. He no longer felt the fatigue of days without rest, nor the guilt of his past deeds. There was only clarity, and a new voice whispering in his mind, the voice of the Lich King. Mal'Ganis was waiting for him, smug and confident, unaware of what Arthas had become. When the Dreadlord saw the rune blade, his grin faltered. "So? The boy has found Frostmourne," he said. "You think you can defeat me?" Arthas didn't answer. He simply raised the sword. The air around him grew colder, the very ground freezing beneath his feet. With a single swing, he struck Mal'Ganis down, and as the demon's body dissolved into shadow, Arthas heard the voice of his new master whisper, "Now we are one." The victory felt hollow. There was no triumph, no relief, only silence. Arthas stood amidst the corpses of his enemies and allies alike, and for the first time the prince felt nothing. His vengeance was complete, yet it had cost him everything. Days turned into weeks as Arthas wandered the icy wilderness of Northrend, following the whispers that now guided him. Frostmourne fed on the dead, and with every life it consumed, its power, his power, grew. The blade's whispers soothed him, convincing him that what he had done was necessary, that the light had abandoned him because it was too weak to save the world. Only through death could true salvation be achieved. When he finally returned to his base camp, his men looked upon him with awe and fear. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, lifeless stare. Some whispered that he was no longer human. They were right. Arthas had come to Northrend seeking vengeance, but he had found something far greater and far worse. Frostmourne had given him the strength to destroy his enemies, but in doing so it had consumed his soul and bound it to the will of the Lich King, the Dark Lord of the Frozen North. The transformation was complete. The Prince of Lordaeron was dead. What remained was something else, a creature forged in the heart of ice and shadow, a servant to a master whose power stretched beyond life and death. As he gazed out across the endless white expanse, Arthas no longer saw a desolate wasteland. He saw a kingdom waiting to be claimed, and deep within his mind, the voice of the Lich King whispered his destiny, to bring an age of darkness upon the world. When Arthas Menethil finally returned to Lordaeron, the people rejoiced. To them, their prince had gone to the ends of the world to destroy the demon who brought the plague, and now he had returned victorious. Bells rang across the capital, flags were raised, and the streets filled with cheers. They did not see the coldness in his eyes, nor the faint mist that followed his every step. They only saw their savior, a man who had braved the frozen north for their sake. But the Arthas who walked those streets was not the same man who had left. Frostmourne hung at his side, silent but alive, its cursed metal whispering softly in his mind. The light no longer touched him. Every step echoed with purpose, not the purpose of duty or love, but of destiny. The voice of the Lich King guided him, urging him toward the throne room where his father waited. King Arthas Menethil II stood alone at the far end of the great hall, the sunlight pouring through stained glass windows, painting him in the colors of gold and crimson. He looked older than Arthas remembered, his shoulders heavy with years of worry. Yet when he saw his son, he smiled, a weary, hopeful smile that spoke of forgiveness and pride. "My son," he said softly, "I knew you would return." Arthas walked down the long carpet, each step deliberate, his armor gleaming darkly in the light. The courtiers and guards bowed, unaware that death itself now passed before them. When he reached the base of the throne, he knelt. His father descended the steps, arms open, ready to embrace him. But the embrace never came. Arthas's voice was calm, almost gentle. "I have returned, father," he said, lifting his gaze. "And now, the kingdom shall be cleansed." The words barely left his lips before Frostmourne flashed in a single fluid motion. The blade moved like a whisper, silent, inevitable. Tyreenus gasped, eyes wide in disbelief, as the sword pierced his heart. The chalice he held fell to the marble floor, its golden wine spilling like blood across the tiles. Arthas caught his father as he fell, lowering him gently to the ground. The old king's trembling hand reached for his son's face, but there was no warmth to find there, only the unfeeling gaze of something no longer human. "What have you done, my son?" Tyreenus whispered. Arthas leaned closer, his expression unreadable. "What I had to," he said. When the king's crown rolled across the floor, the cheers outside the palace began to fade. The people sensed something had changed. The sunlight dimmed as if the world itself mourned what had just occurred. That single act, the murder of his own father, was more than the death of a man. It was the death of a kingdom. Lordaeron's heart stopped beating that day. The land that had once been a beacon of order and light began to rot from within. The plague spread unchecked, the streets filled with corpses, and soon the living would envy the dead. Arthas emerged from the palace hours later, the crown of Lordaeron in his hands. For a moment he stared at it, the symbol of everything he had been born to protect. Then he let it fall, the metal clattering against the stone steps. He turned and walked away, leaving the throne and the crown behind. He no longer needed them. His kingdom was no longer one of men, but of the dead. The fall of Lordaeron was swift. Under Arthas's command, the Scourge swept through the land like wildfire. Villages were razed, cities overrun, and the dead rose to serve their new master. Those who survived fled south, spreading tales of the pale night, with eyes like frost who slaughtered his own people without mercy. Among those who heard the stories was Jaina Proudmoore. She refused to believe them at first, clinging to the memory of the man she loved, the brave, passionate prince who had sworn to protect his people. But when she saw what he had become, the truth broke her. The Arthas she knew was gone, and in his place stood death itself. To many, this moment remains the darkest in the history of Azeroth, not because of the number of lives lost, but because of what was truly destroyed: hope. A son's love for his father, a ruler's bond with his people, a hero's promise to the light. All of it consumed in a single act of betrayal. As night fell over Lordaeron, Arthas walked alone through the palace corridors, his footsteps echoing against the walls. Frostmourne hummed softly, feeding on the soul it had just claimed. The throne room behind him grew still and silent, save for the faint drip of blood from the marble dais. In that silence, a kingdom died, and from its ashes, the Lich King's champion was born. The fall of Lordaeron marked the beginning of a new era, one ruled not by kings but by corpses. With Frostmourne in hand and the voice of the Lich King whispering in his mind, Arthas Menethil became the instrument of an unstoppable plague. The prince who once swore to protect his people now commanded their undead remains, an army of cold obedience marching under his will. His face was still that of the man the people once adored, but his eyes were lifeless, mirrors of the grave. Wherever he went, the dead followed. They rose from the fields, from churchyards, from the very streets where they had once lived and laughed. Each step Arthas took spread the rot further, his power growing with every soul devoured by Frostmourne. The first of his great campaigns as the Scourge's champion was the hunt for Quel'Thalas, the necromancer who had helped unleash the plague across Lordaeron. Arthas had slain him once before in righteous fury, believing that killing the sorcerer would end the corruption. But now, under the Lich King's command, he sought to bring Quel'Thalas back, not to justice, but to unlife. Guided by whispers from beyond, Arthas travelled to Andorhul, where Quel'Thalas' remains had been left to rot. Yet even in death, the necromancer's spirit lingered, calling out for resurrection. Arthas obeyed, collecting his bones and carrying them across the ravaged kingdom. The Lich King demanded that Quel'Thalas be reborn in the mystical sunwell of Quel'Thalas, the heart of elven power. And so began one of the most brutal invasions in Azeroth's history. The High Elves of Quel'Thalas had long lived in isolation, their lands protected by enchanted forests and ancient runes. They believed their barriers impenetrable, but against the Scourge, nothing was sacred. Arthas's undead army tore through the gates of the Eversong Woods like a tidal wave of rot and steel. Trees that had stood for centuries burned, and rivers ran black with ash and blood. The elves fought valiantly, rangers, spellcasters, and soldiers alike, but they could not stop the tide. For every elf that fell, another corpse rose to join the enemy ranks. Arthas's cruelty knew no limits. He ordered the slaughter of entire villages, not for strategy, but to break the will of his opponents. To him, life had become a resource, fuel for his growing army. At the heart of the resistance stood Sylvanas Windrunner, the Ranger General of Silvermoon. A warrior of unmatched skill and unshakable resolve, she fought fiercely to defend her homeland. Her arrows struck true, cutting down dozens of undead. Yet even her strength could not match the unholy power of Frostmourne. When she finally faced Arthas, she fought with all the fury of her people, but he was beyond mortal limits. He defeated her, and in a final act of cruelty refused her death. Instead, he tore her soul from her body and twisted it into undeath, transforming her into the first of the Banshees, a spirit of torment bound to his will. Her screams echoed through the ruins of Silvermoon as her city fell. With Sylvanas broken and the gates shattered, Arthas marched upon the Sunwell itself. The magical waters shimmered with radiant light, the last pure thing left in the dying kingdom. Without hesitation, Arthas cast Quel'Thalas' remains into its depths. The sacred pool boiled and darkened, its purity defiled as necrotic energy surged upward. The necromancer rose again, reborn as a lich, a being of immense power and eternal malice. The resurrection of Quel'Thalas marked a turning point. With his new advisor at his side, Arthas's connection to the Lich King deepened. The whispers in his mind grew stronger, more commanding. He no longer questioned them, he embraced them. Every thought, every action was now devoted to his master's will. As the undead host withdrew from the smoldering ruins of Silvermoon, the land lay in ruin. Once a realm of song and magic, Quel'Thalas was now a graveyard, its beauty defiled, its people slaughtered or enslaved. Arthas looked upon the devastation without emotion. He had accomplished his goal. The voices told him he had done well, and for him that was enough. He no longer spoke of justice, of peace, or even of vengeance. His humanity had withered, stripped away piece by piece until only purpose remained. Where once he had led knights in gleaming armor, he now commanded an army of bone and decay. Where once he sought to save his kingdom, He now sought only to serve the frozen throne. As the northern winds howled through the desecrated forests of Quel'Thalas, Arthas turned his gaze toward the horizon. His next orders awaited: to march west, to wipe out what little resistance remained, and to pave the way for the Lich King's dominion. In that moment, any trace of the Prince of Lordaeron was gone. What stood in his place was death itself, cold, patient, and unstoppable. The whispers of the frozen throne guided him onward, and the world of the living trembled in anticipation of the darkness yet to come. By the time Arthas returned to Northrend, he was no longer the young prince who had once sought to protect his people. He was a harbinger of death, the embodiment of the Scourge's relentless will, and a servant to the Lich King's dark power. The frozen wastes greeted him not as a stranger, but as a master. Ice and wind howled in submission, bending to the command of the runeblade at his side. Every step he took sent tremors through the earth, as if the land itself feared him. Illidan Stormrage, the self-proclaimed betrayer of his people and hunter of demons, had been tracking Arthas ever since the prince had risen as the Scourge's champion. The demon hunter saw the threat in Arthas not as a man, but as a weapon, a force capable of consuming Azeroth itself. When the two finally confronted one another at the base of Icecrown Glacier, the air was electric with tension. Blades clashed, magic flared, and the ground cracked under the weight of their power. Illidan moved with the agility of a predator, his twin warglaives flashing in the dim northern light. He struck at Frostmourne with all the fury of his hatred and fear, but Arthas was unrelenting. Each swing of Frostmourne cut deeper, not only into flesh but into the very resolve of those who faced him. The blade seemed alive, hungering for the souls around it, and Illidan struggled to find a gap in the storm of death that surrounded the prince. "You were once a man," Illidan shouted across the battlefield, his voice echoing through the ice. "Somewhere inside, there must still be light." Arthas paused, just long enough to turn his cold gaze upon the demon hunter. "Light is for the weak," he said, his voice void of emotion. "I am beyond it." With a swing, Frostmourne sliced through Illidan's defenses, forcing him back, and then again, driving him to the very edge of the glacier. The fight raged across the icy cliffs and frozen lakes, each blow shaking the surrounding mountains. Illidan's magic collided with the necrotic energy of the Scourge, sending waves of ice and shadow into the sky. Yet with every strike, Arthas felt the voice of Ner'zhul in his mind, guiding his hands, predicting his opponent's every move. Where once he had relied on instinct and skill, now he relied on the will of a master who saw all, the Lich King as his presence in every thought, every heartbeat. At last Illidan fell back, battered but defiant, realizing that this was no mere prince before him. Arthas moved with inexorable purpose, Frostmourne raised high, and with a single decisive strike, he forced the demon hunter to retreat, leaving Northrend's wastes silent once more. The battle had been a test, and Arthas had emerged unchallenged. With the path clear, he began the ascent to the frozen throne itself. Each step up the icy stairs was heavy with memory. Stratholme, Lordaeron, Quel'Thalas, every city burned, every ally and friend lost, every act of betrayal and murder flashed before him. Every sin, every choice, every moment of pride and obsession converged on this path. Frostmourne's power hummed in his hands, synchronizing with the heartbeat of its wielder, merging with the shadow of Ner'zhul that guided him from beyond. The wind grew colder with each step, carrying whispers from the void. Voices of the dead, of the corrupted, of all who had been claimed by the Scourge rose to meet him. But Arthas did not falter. He welcomed them, recognized them as the chorus of his dominion, and stepped forward with absolute certainty. There was no hesitation, no regret, only the unshakable certainty of a man who had already embraced death, destruction, and the darkness that had claimed him. When he reached the summit of Icecrown Glacier, the frozen throne loomed before him, an altar of ice and power, jagged and imposing, exuding a coldness that seeped into the very soul. Frostmourne sang in his hands, its hunger complete, its will entwined with his own. As he ascended the steps to claim the throne, Arthas understood that this was the culmination of everything he had done. The boy who had once chased justice, the prince who had loved and lost, the paladin who had served the light, all were gone. Only the instrument of the Lich King remained. Upon placing Frostmourne upon the throne, a surge of power coursed through Arthas, binding him to the frozen throne and to Ner'zhul in ways that were both eternal and inescapable. His transformation was complete. Where once there had been humanity, now there was only obedience to the will of the Lich King. Where once there had been hope, there was only the cold, absolute certainty of dominion. As the ice creaked and shifted beneath him, Arthas stood alone, the winds of Northrend howling around his frozen citadel. Every shadow, every echo of his past, every victory and every sin had led him here. The journey of the prince, the paladin, and the savior had ended, and in his place, the herald of death ascended, ready to reign over a world that would soon learn the true meaning of fear. The air around Icecrown was deathly still after Arthas placed Frostmourne upon the frozen throne. For a moment the winds ceased, and even the glaciers seemed to hold their breath. Time itself appeared to pause, as though the world recognized that something beyond comprehension had just occurred. The prince who had once dreamed of glory and honor had become something far greater and far more terrible than any mortal could have imagined. Within the depths of the throne, the spirit of Ner'zhul stirred. Once a shaman of great renown, Ner'zhul had been trapped by the burning hatred of the Lich King, his essence warped into a being of pure malice and power. For centuries he had waited for a host worthy of his strength, one who could extend his dominion across Azeroth. Arthas, consumed by vengeance, pride, and obsession, proved the perfect vessel. The fusion was instantaneous, violent, and complete. Frostmourne sang with a new resonance as the two wills intertwined. Ner'zhul's presence filled Arthas's mind, whispering secrets of the Scourge, strategies for domination, and promises of eternal command. Arthas's own consciousness, once vibrant with emotion, doubt, and loyalty, receded, becoming a shadow beneath the weight of the Lich King's power. Yet it did not vanish entirely. His thoughts, memories, and lingering pride remained, feeding the intelligence and resolve of the new entity. This was the birth of the Lich King. From his icy citadel, Arthas surveyed the lands he had conquered and the kingdoms that still resisted. Lordaeron lay in ruin, Silvermoon smoldered, and northern villages were empty, their dead now marching beneath the Scourge banner. He saw it all, and yet he felt nothing. Not joy, not sorrow, not guilt. There was only control, absolute, unshakable, and terrifying. Every move of the Scourge, every campaign, every soul captured and raised in undeath fell under his command, as easily as a king moving pawns on a chessboard. The transformation went beyond the physical. His armor had become a dark shell, black and jagged, etched with frost and runes pulsing with necrotic energy. His eyes glowed with an unholy light, reflecting the void within. Frostmourne was no longer merely a weapon. It was a conduit through which the Lich King's will reached into the mortal world. Its hunger for souls resonated with his own, amplifying his power and extinguishing the remnants of the man he had once been. Silence followed the coronation. Northrend, a continent that had once tested him with blizzards and storms, now lay subdued beneath his gaze. The dead stopped their endless wandering, pausing in obedient stillness. The winds that had carried whispers of warning now whispered only submission. Even the living dared not approach. The world seemed to recognize the arrival of a force that transcended kings, heroes, and armies alike. Yet with ultimate power came emptiness. Arthas felt it, though he did not fear it. The thrill of conquest, the satisfaction of vengeance, even the fleeting bonds of friendship and love, all were gone. What remained was precision, patience, and inevitability. Every plan, every strategy, every move of the Scourge unfolded exactly as he willed it, and there was no one to challenge him, no one to call him back from the brink. The world was silent, and in that silence, the Lich King found dominion and isolation. From Icecrown's summit, he watched as the storm of death began to gather. Across Azeroth, kingdoms unaware of the looming threat continued their lives, blind to the shadow that now held absolute sway. The armies of men, elves, and dwarves would soon learn the cost of defiance, though none could yet understand the magnitude of what had arisen. The fusion of man and spirit embodied both chaos and control. Arthas's ambition and obsession combined with Ner'zhul's cunning and mastery of undeath. Together they became a singular entity, capable of strategy and destruction, patience and cruelty, foresight and unrelenting will. Neither completely man nor wholly spirit, the Lich King was something new, a force of balance between order and annihilation, yet leaning entirely toward dominion and ruin. In the hollow quiet of his throne room, Arthas felt neither loneliness nor fear. There was no remorse for what had been done, no longing for what had been lost. Only awareness of absolute power, of a world on the edge of devastation, and of the unbreakable chains that now bound him to his own destiny. The Lich King had arrived, and from his icy seat of authority he would watch, wait, and manipulate the world to come. Every decision, every death, every shadow creeping across Azeroth now bore his mark. The storm was coming, and nothing alive could stop it. From the silence of ultimate dominion, a new era was about to begin. Arthas Menethil, once the shining prince of Lordaeron, ruled over the Scourge with unyielding authority. From the frozen throne atop Icecrown Glacier, he commanded legions of the dead, extending his influence across the continents of Azeroth. Villages, cities, and entire kingdoms fell under his shadow. Their streets emptied, their living turned into servants of his will. His reign was not one of governance, but of absolute dominion, a quiet, calculated terror that spread inexorably, leaving the world in frozen anticipation of the horrors yet to come. The living feared him, but even the dead felt the precision of his control. Each risen soldier, each twisted abomination, acted not on instinct but on the orders of a mind that combined the cunning of Ner'zhul with the obsession of Arthas. The Scourge became an extension of the Lich King himself, a singular, unstoppable entity, capable of reshaping the very world with the sweep of its armies. Mountains, forests, and plains alike bore the marks of his influence. Nothing in Azeroth moved without leaving a trace in his cold, calculating gaze. Yet the greatest tragedy of his rule was not the lands he conquered, but the emptiness within him. Where once there had been love, friendship, and duty, now there was only obedience and hunger for power. Frostmourne had consumed not just his soul, but the essence of the man he once was. He no longer walked among the living as a prince or a paladin. He existed as a mythic figure of fear, a godlike presence whose will was absolute, whose emotions had been stripped to hollow echoes. Throughout his dominion, whispers of dissent persisted, heroes rising in the east, dwarves rallying in the mountains, night elves defending the forests. Arthas watched them all, his perception extending across miles, his patience infinite. He crushed uprisings not with haste, but with inevitability. Resistance was not met with mercy. It was incorporated, transformed, or annihilated. Quel'Thalas, the Lich he had resurrected, became his right hand, amplifying his dominion and ensuring that the Scourge's reach was both precise and terrifyingly efficient. For centuries, the Scourge continued its quiet march across Azeroth. And yet, as with all things, power attracted challengers. The combined forces of the Alliance and Horde, united by desperation and the promise of survival, eventually mounted an assault upon Icecrown's citadel. Heroes from every corner of the world climbed the glacier, braving the Scourge and its frozen terrors, fighting for vengeance and for the faint hope of restoring balance. The final confrontation was cataclysmic. Arthas met them at the pinnacle of his power, Frostmourne glinting in the icy light. Every strike he delivered bore the weight of his entire history: Stratholme, Lordaeron, Quel'Thalas, each atrocity fueling his combat prowess. But even the Lich King, the immortal fusion of man and spirit, could not withstand the combined courage, skill, and will of Azeroth's greatest champions. Slowly, inexorably, his defenses faltered. In the end, Arthas fell. Frostmourne was shattered, and with its destruction the grip of the Lich King over his own soul weakened. Ner'zhul's spirit was severed, leaving the echoes of Arthas's own desires exposed and unshielded. As he lay defeated atop the frozen throne, the weight of his actions finally came into focus. The man who had sought to save his people had become their greatest doom. The kingdom he loved lay in ruin, its streets haunted by the undead. The friends and allies he cherished were gone or turned against him, and the innocence he once carried was lost beyond recovery. Even in death, his story resonates. Arthas is remembered not merely for his power, but for his tragedy, the collision of noble intent and overwhelming obsession. Every choice, though justified in his mind, led him down a path of destruction from which there was no return. His life is a cautionary tale of how even the brightest light can be extinguished by pride, impatience, and the seduction of absolute power. Yet it is precisely this complexity that makes Arthas one of gaming history's most compelling characters. He was not born evil. He was a man who loved deeply, hoped fiercely, and acted decisively. And it was those very qualities, his devotion to duty, his desire to protect, his willingness to sacrifice, that became the instruments of his corruption. Players remember him not only as a villain, but as a hero twisted into myth, a figure who embodies the terrifying cost of obsession and the fragility of human morality. Arthas Menethil's legacy is eternal. He stands as a testament to the dangers of unchecked ambition, the consequences of choices made in desperation, and the profound tragedy of a man who once sought to be a savior, only to become a legend of darkness. The frozen wastes of Northrend, the ruins of Lordaeron, and the echoes of Silvermoon all speak his name, a reminder that even the brightest light can fall, and that the line between hero and monster is thinner than anyone dares to believe. In the end, Arthas remains a story for the ages, a prince, a paladin, a destroyer, a king, and ultimately, a haunting reflection of what happens when good intentions are corrupted by the desire to control fate itself. His tale is over, yet its shadow lingers, warning all who would follow that even the noblest path can lead to ruin.